My guest today is Doug Filippone, the Global Defense Lead at Palantir. Let me set just a little bit of context for our conversation today. In 2015, the Obama administration introduced us to the reemergence of the great power competition. By January 2018, the Trump administration's National Defense Strategy number 4 formally reoriented U.S. national security strategy and the U.S. defense strategy toward an explicit primary focus on the great power competition with China and Russia. Today, DoD is leading a global posture review, so the military footprint is appropriately aligned with our foreign policy and national security priorities. At the center of that effort, of course, is data. And not just data about China or Russia, but data that underlies every strategy and plan that DoD is embarking on. The review and great power competition depends on innovation, speed, and the ability to buy new and emerging capabilities. So how can DoD ensure its position for success with the great power competition? Well, that's where my guest comes in. Once again, I'm joined by Doug Filippone, the Global Defense Lead at Palantir. Now, Doug, as just a short intro, we've talked a lot about the great power competition, and we're going to get into that in a quick second. But let me just start with a little bit about Palantir, because I think what's important here is I think maybe a lot of folks in government's heard of you, but maybe aren't quite sure what Palantir really does. So maybe give us that elevator speech of if you're in the elevator with the general and they say, "What I've heard of you, but what do you do?" Give us a little bit of background.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. No, this is a really interesting topic. And I've spent a lot of time on this topic for the last 13 years or so devoted to it. But in the initial days of Palantir, the idea post 9/11 was around solving the problem of sharing information and thinking about how can you share information so that people can make decisions while protecting civil liberties. That was the original idea. And so it was around the Patriot Act, and you had this choice between security or civil liberties. And what we felt at Palantir was that was a false choice. You could use technology to have security with civil liberties. And so that was the genesis of the technology that we're building. And then when I joined around 2008 to start our defense business, that morphed into away from the intel and law enforcement side into the defense world. And then, that's where I have most of my experience. But the idea back then all the way till now was, how do you take all of the information that's out there that you're allowed to see and have permissions to see and bring that into a way to make as fast and as good a decision as possible?
And this has been the age-old problem, right? We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the sad day of September 11th, 2001, where the term, unfortunately, connect the dots became the term of art, the term of need. And I think that's still the biggest challenge today that DoD and really every agency is facing is how do they take the information they have, put it with the other information they have, and understand what it all means. Yeah. Is that still where we with that progress?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we've made a lot of progress, and Palantir, we've spent billions of dollars on R&D building a platform to help solve that problem. But we're a lot further down the road, but the same core problem exists. And so that's one of the misnomers or mistakes in thinking about the problems from 9/11, or if it's in the counterinsurgency fight or in near peer or peer competition, that problem, you can't wish that problem away. There are different nuances in the problem sets in terms of, in the near peer fight or whatever we're calling it now, you have to make those decisions faster. But the core problem is the same, is that information is all over the place. We haven't gotten rid of mainframes. The data models or schemas of those data are often different. The permissions for each different system is different. The way you call and structure the data, the format of the data, how large the data is, how do you move that around so that you can make a decision that's important? Yeah. That problem it's a seminal problem. It hasn't gone away, but Palantir has applied our core technology, the operating system that connects these things, in almost every industry around the world at this point.
I brought up this idea of the great power competition in the beginning, and you referred to it a little bit, but it's really causing that shift of okay, how does DoD and the government more broadly think about how to apply technology to solve that problem? Because as you said, we haven't solved mainframes, we're still in them. There's a lot of data structure problems, no matter how many data strategies OMB puts out, yep, and knowing how many chief data officers there are across the government. we're still kind of facing this challenge of, okay, if you say a boat, what kind of boat are you talking about, right? I'm talking about a sailboat. Oh, you're talking about a speedboat? Uh-oh, now we're off. So how does this cause that? How has the change in technology really helped the government think differently about how they bring that data together?
Well, they're just starting to think about it differently. I mean, the problem with most, like we've seen a lot of Palantir's experience is that we've worked on this problem in every industry around the world. And so we've learned a lot. We've learned from a lot of mistakes from other agencies, from other industries, other industry partners, and our own mistakes. I mean, we've thrown whole platforms in the trash and started over. So, you have to learn from those things. But, the core problem is still fundamentally, like right now you talk about sensor to shooter. You want to talk about like how quickly can you make those decisions if you have a swarm of drones coming at you. How can you make the decision very quickly? What are you going to do about it? How long do you have to react? These are all like really hard problems. And one thing that I've seen both across commercial industry and in the government is there are very few examples of a strategy, a technology strategy that actually works. Because the core thing we're really talking about is like an IT transformation, and most of the time those things fail. People talk about it, they'll put out a white paper, they'll get promoted based off the white paper or the procurement, and then they're long gone before there's any, accountability or results whatsoever of those big problems. The biggest mistake folks make is you just need to get started. And the more you talk about it and you want to make it perfect, you just don't get there from here.
Yeah. It's interesting you say a lot of times when they put out these strategies, big ideas, getting to the starting line, they think, okay, we have a strategy. All right, now we're at the starting line, and they're really far from it. How do you get started? What are you seeing from your government customers about how, whether it's the Air Force or the Army or a Special Operations Command, how are they getting started using that data to, as you said, make faster and better decisions?
Yeah, well, I think, look, the unfortunate truth that you can't get away from is you can't just wish away your legacy architecture. Like, it's just there, right? And so you can spend time assessing it and then cataloging it and then thinking about how you're going to integrate it. But the myriad of new challenges that face the department, and when I say the department, I mean the DoD, but you could think of any U.S. government agency is the same way, right? Where you don't know in the next year how many new random crazy things are we going to face, right? Earthquakes, fires, pandemics, war. You can't wish away all of that complexity. You have to just embrace it and get started and do something useful and focus on producing an outcome right now. And so that just means you have to start somewhere.
When you talk about focus on producing that outcome, can you maybe walk us through an example? And again, if you can't use specific agencies, that's fine, but maybe a customer case study where they've gone down that path and obviously using Palantir software to really start, again, pushing the speed to decision.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I think of, Operation Warp Speed, or the logistics effort around vaccine distribution, it was, you're trying to connect hospitals, pharmaceutical makers, logistics companies with a complete supply chain, and then at the federal level, get these things made and then distributed in a way that people were never meant to share. If you think of like the DoD in particular or the intelligence community, there's all these silos of data. Well, the medical community is 10 times worse than the CIA in that terms, right? Where we've always been about protecting privacy and keeping these things silos, and you have to have a right to know all these things, and then individual hospitals aren't going to share. There's never been a system on purpose to bring all of that information together. And so thinking about how do you solve that problem? And so, I mean, this is where Palantir in particular had been at the right place at the right time, but it's not luck. It's, we had spent 10 plus years and billions of dollars of R&D on that same problem. It just happened to be that we built the technology around solving this stovepipe of information. So it's basically like, if you think of Palantir as an operating system, it lays in the middle. And so what we've done is productize the connectors that will talk to legacy data systems. And so the idea there is you can't like connecting all these things in the wild will take 10 years, it'll never work. or building it from scratch and doing a data lake never works, right? You just can't just throw all the data in a data lake. You lose all the lineage and the auditability of that stuff. And so Palantir's approach is you have this operating system that can live in between the use case and the outcome that people need, that can be changed in any way, but it can have very productized, quick ability to interact with a source system, a database, a sensor, any sort of source of information where you can just connect to that, and then you can keep track of the access controls and the privacy that's supposed to be attached to that, and then keep that as a first order principle all the way through to the outcome. And so, because sometimes when you see all of that stuff, you can never get to the outcome, because the outcome, which I'm nebulously talking about here, is if you're a decision maker, you have a problem. You want to make the best decision, and you want to see all the information that's going to inform you. So in the case of the Army, they want to be able to plan a mission. So you have a myriad of friendly forces and all the information about those friendly forces. You have the troops and their health and the equipment and the status of those pieces of equipment. And then you have the units, which are a macro set of all those things. And then you want to know the readiness. Are they ready to go? And then they become a part of a plan that goes against a real world crisis. Right. And in that real world crisis, you have a whole different set of information and data sources that talk about the enemy. And then you have somewhere in the middle, you have sensors or people that are generating new information and making that in a certain process. And you want to combine all of that so that the commander can see it without too much noise, just what they want to see and they have permission to do, so that they can start to build a plan. That is one example of how our operating system would bring that universe together.
And what that's doing in many ways is ensuring that not only do they have the right data, but the data they want, and then they can make a decision. And then as the data changes, they can continue to evolve, because that platform, as you mentioned, is always grabbing that new data from those sensors, from those people, however often it updates. So it's that constant feedback loop of information to make that better decision.
No, exactly. I mean, one of the main problems is the government has been very good at, during certain exigent circumstances, they will either stand up a whole new agency, or they'll build a new program, and they'll build an exotic capability that you would have that would collect some sort of information for you. The problem ends up is that once you gather that information, it's usually stored on some secret website or something. And so as an analyst or a decision maker or an operations officer, you're just trying to get that information, and you're like, okay, wait, in my mind, I have to go log into 55 different websites, and then I would download a file, and then I would, in my mind, recreate a story, and then I put it in PowerPoint. And then I would brief it up, and then there's no, you lose what's called the reactor.
Right.
And so we're just sharing this stuff around, and then there's no human knowledge. So when we think about, obviously Afghanistan is on everyone's mind these last few days, but if we think about how we fought that war, and even the idea of knowledge management of, like, we fought 20 different one-year wars, as people are cycling in and out. We've talked about this ad nauseum, but the idea there is you are collecting a legacy of information where all the people who are working on this, they would comment on it, they would add to it, and you just create this repository that lives on its own.
I think we used to call that knowledge management, and that was never very popular in government, was it?
Yeah. Well, it ends up just being like a hard drive that you would hand off to your
Here you go.
Here you go.
Exactly.
And then they would never look at it again. If it had one good thing on it, maybe you probably couldn't find it anyway.
Exactly. Doug, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. You're listening to the discussion, Technology and Great Power Competition, the Value of Public-Private Sector Partnerships, sponsored by Palantir on Federal News Network.